Hello, welcome you all to the CEGAANA Spotlight Series. Thanks for joining. Today, I'm so thrilled to have Professor Dr. Vijay Chidambaram with us. For people in the field, Professor Vijay needs no introduction. For others, Professor Vijay Chidambaram is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science in the University of Texas at Austin. After completing his bachelor's in computer science from College of Engineering Guindy, CEG, in 2009, he went on to do Masters and Ph.D. at University of Wisconsin Madison in US. His research aims to build the next generation of storage systems. Besides this, Professor Vijay is also a student-friendly person and known for his presence in social media. In fact, I got to know about him after reading a post on Quora and becoming a Twitter follower later. I'm so thrilled and inspired by his achievements and initiatives. It is an honor for me to have this conversation with him today. Without further ado, here we start the interview. Let's start with the first one. Could you tell us about your journey from CG days till now?
Sure. So I did bachelor's in computer science from CEG 2005 to 2009, and after that I did my master's in University of Wisconsin Madison, and then while I was there, I started doing research and I transitioned to my PhD. I graduated in 2015, and then I did 1 year postdoc at VMware Research in California. And then since 2016, I've been a professor at the University of Texas at Austin.
It's just amazing journey, actually. Sometimes we see the list of universities, the top universities, and I'm really glad one of us is there, and I'm really excited about that. So I always get this question when did you start researching, or how did you get into research? What was the first problem do you remember the first problem you picked, and maybe it might have not been solved or something, but what was the experience?
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about that. So when I went to Wisconsin in 2009, I was not actually planning to get into research. I just wanted to do a master's and then go to industry. And so while I was there, I started working with my advisors, the professors who eventually become my advisors, Remzi and Andrea Arpachidiso. And I started working with them, and it was very interesting. Remzi and Andrea, they work on storage problems, storage and systems problems. And so it was interesting. So I started looking into this, and so then at the end of my 2 years, I did get a job. And so I was thinking of joining Microsoft at that point of time. Then my advisor was I can see that you're really interested in research, you should stay and do a PhD. And he said that, Microsoft is always going to be there. So if you, after let's say 6 months, you decide that it's not working out, then, you'd still be able to get a job. So but I think, you should give it a try. And I was like, so to sort of detour a little bit, right? So when I did my master's, I did my internship at Google in New York. And when I was doing my undergrad in India, I always wanted to join Google. It was sort of a dream.
Everyone's dream.
Yeah. So I was when I got the internship, I was super thrilled, right? I mean, this is amazing, and this is it, and stuff like that. And so when I did the internship, I felt there's something missing, right? I mean, it was in a good team. We were working on the Google file system, and it was great work, and it was exciting, but I felt like something was missing. So I actually enjoyed working with my professor more than I enjoyed writing code in internship. So I felt okay, that makes sense. Maybe I should give this some time. And so once I came back and my advisor said stay for a little bit longer, then I decided to do that. And then the PhD started really working out well, and then I just stayed for the whole thing. But I was very close to going to industry.
Yeah, that's interesting, because growing up in India, every parent wants their kid to become a doctor, but they don't say doctor of philosophy, doctor in medicine.
Yes.
So Was there like initial friction when you told your family that you're going to be doing a PhD?
Yeah. It's actually like very interesting because my family were the one who were pushing me the most to do a
Oh,
PhD.
it's interesting.
So when I was finishing my master's, I could only think very short term, right? I wanted to get a job, I wanted to buy a car, stuff like that. And so they were like, like you can always do that, like like so if you have like a good opportunity to do a PhD and like like your professor is like good and like like they think you have potential, you should try. So they were the ones who actually sort of like encouraged me. So to I mean like because my professor was like very positive about it, like they were like you should give this a shot, and like they were also like if it doesn't work out, like like after 6 months you can go to industry. So I was like very
I'm really
great.
surprised here, seriously.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know it's not
Yeah,
the typical reaction, right? Because like
yeah.
I was like like everybody, like I just wanted to finish and like go to industry and like make money and stuff, but they were like like it's fine, like like you can take a little bit of time. And because like uh, I don't think if I had gone to industry, I would have come back and did a
Yeah,
PhD. So it was kind of like then or never. And they were like, like you should at least try. And if it doesn't work out, it's fine.
I'm glad.
So
Second thing is, I want to break some myths about doing PhD. Uh,
mhm.
I want to like ask you, what are the things that you thought about PhD before getting in and after you finished? So, like something like myths about PhD, which you thought like it's completely false after
Yeah,
doing it.
sure. So I think the most common myth and the myth that I also believed when I was doing my master's is that you just have to be like super smart and like a genius and whatnot to do a PhD. And I mean, now that I have students of my own and like I done all this, it's not really true. I mean, you need some level of like doing well academically and like being interested in the stuff and so on. But I think what matters most for a PhD is persistence. So you will like you will write a paper and you'll submit to a conference and you'll get rejected, and this can happen a lot of times. So the being able to be strong and look past your rejections and keep working is sort of like the most useful things in a PhD. You don't really need to be like super smart. In fact,
Right.
I would say that like if you can make it to CEG, you already have more than enough smarts to do a PhD in the US.
Uh, so I'm really curious. What are you currently passionate about? What are your areas of research now?
Sure. So I run the UT Systems and Storage Lab. So this is basically a group that is focused on emergent storage technologies. So on an application. So for example, like recently we have had like a new storage device called persistent memory that Intel has produced, and it's almost as fast as DRAM, like main memory. But if you lose power, you still have all your data. Usually if you keep it in memory and you don't save your file, for example, when if your laptop crashes or like loses power, then your data is gone. But with persistent memory, your data is still will remain if you crash or you lose power. So it's like super fast storage, like that's a simple way to put it. And my group is working on how do you build systems for this. So how do you build a file system? We did that like last year. How do you build a key value store? We're working on it now. How do you ensure that over time your performance remains stable? So that's another thing that we're working on. And we also work on new applications, like for example, machine learning and blockchain. These all introduce new requirements from the storage system. And so if you took like any old storage system and you run it under like like a blockchain application, it will not work. The performance will be terrible. So how do you get good performance in these settings is also something that we work on. So in general, like anything connected to storage and like new storage technologies, new applications, that would be of interest to my lab.
That's interesting. Yeah, you're doing a lot of computer science now, but this is like every undergrad's question when they're entering college, like which major should I choose, right? So I
Mhm.
know you are going to be biased about computer science now, But my question is, what would you choose today if you are entering as an undergrad?
So I also have like an interesting story here. So when I was actually going for counseling for CEG, my parents had convinced me that like I should take EC, right?
Yeah.
Because like of like things
Top
like
departments. Yeah.
yeah, it's very general and like like you will get a good job and like you can do higher studies and like stuff like this. So when I went for counseling, I lost the last EC seat that was available and I had to pick computer science. But uh, for a long time, I was actually passionate about computer science. I really liked it even sort of like during school. So I mean, it turned out nicely that I was working on something or studying something that I was really passionate about, and that really I think is the sort of like the root of success. More than I think any particular branch, I think you should do what you're really interested in.
This is a good segue to get into a section for current students. Since you are like in a role in academia, I have like all these students asking me like, how should I prepare my applications for higher studies? So I have this question like, what are the top 3 things you look for in an application? And could you also like go through a little bit of the application process review that happens in universities?
Sure. So the process is very different for masters and a PhD. So these two things shouldn't be confused. So for a master's, right? Typically, what you'll be doing in a master's is that you'll be doing more of what you did in CEG. You'll be taking courses, and these will be more advanced courses compared to what you did in CEG. So the main thing they look for is academic excellence. So like when you were at CEG, did you do well in your courses? Did you take interest in your courses? Did you put effort in, and so on? Another thing they look for is usually like letters from other professors, and this is sort of like less important in CEG, I would say, because letters are all like very uniform, and they say basically the same thing about applicants. But if you look at like letters written by professors in the US, they often go into a lot of detail about like the student, what their interests are, what they remarkable things that they have done, like why they think the student will do well in masters and so on. A lot of the letters we see from CEG are of the form, this person took my class, they did well in class, like that's it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't tell us a lot. Like we already get that from the transcripts, so it's not super useful, right? And also like I think we also have to calibrate based on who the letter writer is. So typically like letters in India are like almost uniformly positive. Like every letter says like this student is great, but in a for like a good letter from here, they will be from like professors who are well known, and they will calibrate. Like for example, in CG in computer science, or I guess like now in IT, my undergrad advisor was Dr. Anjani Parthasarathi, who we used to call RP ma'am. So RP ma'am is like really good. So if I get a letter from RP ma'am saying this student is the best I've seen in like 20 years, I will absolutely do what I can to get the student admitted. So it's the letters can be very very useful, but most of the times they're very um, like uniform in India.
Yeah.
It's also like a myth that like a letter from the HOD matters, right?
Yeah.
That is not totally not true. We don't care. The seniority of the professor matters because just because someone who's a full professor or like has been working for like 20 years will have seen more students, right?
Yeah.
And in a good letter they would be able to calibrate this. Like they would be able to say like this is this I'm writing a letter for a student, like let's call him X. This student is as good as Y, who did his masters in like MIT, or Z, who's doing his PhD in Wisconsin, and that gives us a really like a very good way to calibrate, right?
Yeah.
So just because of that, like letters from more senior people are preferred, but I mean it doesn't matter if they're the HOD or not. That has no extra weight.
It has to be very much specific about the student itself. I
Yes.
get that
Yes.
point.
Mm-hmm.
There is also like a growing emphasis on like undergraduate research experience, right? It's not so much seen in India, but it's very popular in US universities. So how do you think one should uh, uh, have that experience, if at all? Like, how should someone approach? What are the expectations out of it?
Right. So I think to clear up more misconceptions here, you don't need to do research to get a good admission into a good master's program. You do need to have done research to get admission into like a good PhD program. So research is not essential or like even something that is prioritized for a master's program, right? Where you're going to come here, the expectation is that you're going to take more courses and you have to do well in those courses. That's kind of what is required. A lot of people, even when they're applying for masters, seem to have this notion that they must have some research experience, and that is not true at all. You need good letters, and typically if you do research with someone, they will write you a good letter, like a
Yeah,
better letter than, this person took my class, right? Because they would have worked with them for a while and they know them better and they're able to write a better letter. So I think undergraduate research experience correlates with better letters, but is not essential or required.
that's amazing. Uh, the next thing I want to ask you is about the online learning. It's like everywhere now, uh, but how should one approach it? What should one think about maximizing the outcomes of an online learning program?
So I guess like there's a bunch of different things here. So one is like there are free online courses you can take at like edX and Coursera and so on. So I would say those are mainly for your own benefit. So there's a topic that you're interested in, so you take those courses and you now learn more about the topic. They don't really have a lot of weight in sort of like academic admissions. It's usually like what you did wherever you did your undergrad that is more closely looked at. Um, if your online learning helps you do undergraduate research or like lets you get like a better letter, I think that's great. But people shouldn't be under the notion that they can take a Coursera course and like that will somehow help them get better admin.
Uh, Following this, I have also a question about the hypes around the new technologies like blockchain, deep learning,
Mhm.
artificial intelligence, etc. Some of them are very futuristic to say, and sometimes some are like we are very late to the party. How should
Mhm.
one take the hype, and how should they be prepared?
So, uh, artificial intelligence and like deep learning and so on, or I guess generally you would say like machine learning, are right now the most sought after topics. So for example, at UT Austin, when we get PhD applications, about 60% of our applications, I think 40 to 60%, are for machine learning, right? And unfortunately, the competition among those who want to do a PhD in computer science in machine learning has also gone up immensely. So, and I would caution people like, I mean, so it's a very new field and there's a lot of stuff that is going on. So to do like something deep in machine learning takes a lot of time and effort. Um, there are machine learning things you can do, which is like, like application of known methods, which are like going to be much easier to do. So in terms of like for students who are interested in machine learning, um, I would say actually do a machine learning course, right? So if you take an NLP course or machine learning course and so on, you will see that a lot of it is maths, right? I mean, that's what it kind of like boils down into. And there is hilariously this like intersection of people who like machine learning for the hype, but then are also terrible at math. So those don't go well. So I think, I mean, there's a lot of hype in machine learning, and I think definitely the applications of machine learning are amazing. But students should really look into a machine learning course to see what it is actually about and whether they would enjoy that, right? Rather than just looking at the hype.
Yeah, there's so many things happening, and we don't understand what is actually hype and what is actually a progress. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's a very good note. Uh, Here we have a new segue into something called a rapid fire.
Mhm.
It's more like self-help and motivational things for our listeners. Uh,
Mhm.
so, what are the three things you learned from your mentors that you always carry with you?
Yeah, I mean, the first is like dream big. Back when I was in CG, I had like a lot of like friends among seniors who basically are responsible for me doing a master's and then getting into research and all of it. So people like Lenin Ravindranath, who was 4 years my senior, who then did a PhD at MIT and I was at Microsoft Research. So they really set my sights high for me. So there's a saying that you are the sum or like the average of the five people that you hang out with. And so having people who dream big and who sort of like inspire you is like really important. And I think that is sort of like, to me, like the biggest benefit I received from CEG. You had all these like amazing students who are like doing like amazing things, and that sort of like rubs off on you. Like, and if
Yeah,
you look at student quality between CEG and the next ranked place, like there's not a lot of difference. But then the exposure that people in those universities have is much lower than what you get at CEG. And I think that makes a lot of difference to where you sort of like end up in life. So I'd say definitely dream big and don't give up. I like to tell the story of like how almost at every place where I got a job, I was first rejected. So when I was an undergrad, I got rejected for a Microsoft research internship, later got a job after my PhD. When I was at Google, I mean, when I was an undergrad, I tried for a Google internship, got rejected, later got it doing masters and so on. So um, rejections are like, part of life, and be persistent and keep working. Um, for the third thing, I would say like, find what is like really interesting for you, right? I mean, a lot of people will be jumping on like hype trains, like we just talked about machine learning, but you have to find what is really interesting for you, so that like you will be naturally inclined to put in the effort, right? If you're doing something just because of hype, I don't think you do the same kind of work, whereas like if it's really interesting to you.
that's true. That's true. You always lose then after a point. Why am
Hmm.
I doing this?
Yeah.
Very well said. Next question I have is very interesting. What's one moment in your life that you always think of and very proud of? It could be like one moment or something.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. So I would say there's many things, but like one thing is like when I did my first when I presented my first paper during my PhD,
Okay.
and that was like before an audience of like 500 people and like the experts in the room, and it was like well received, and like like that was pretty special. The first paper that we
Paper.
published.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's always there. Uh, Also, like one thing you wish you had known or someone told you in college or when you are in college.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like everything we've discussed so far.
Yeah,
When I was in CG, I had no idea what research was about. I had no idea how a master's was different from a PhD. So all of these things, right? I think exposure to these things is kind of like vital. So when I go to India, I always stop at CEG and I give a talk. Usually, like what
nice.
is masters, what is PhD, and like how should you apply for a master's, what should you expect, and so on. So I think that exposure is very important.
I was really surprised when I read somewhere like people don't know that they are funded for doing a PhD and they get some sort of
Exactly.
stipend for doing it. So they're not like
Yeah.
paying for a program. So yeah.
Yes. It was a kind of shock when I learned about it.
So I have some specific questions. I really like reading research papers, but always I had questions like how people come up with that idea. And all of a sudden, one day I came to know about the CSR Tales blog in Medium, and I was really, really taken off by that. So, few words about how that was conceived and what's happening there.
Sure. So that is like CS Research Tales. So that's the blog that I started. I think somewhere around 2018. And the idea is simply that like when we write research papers, we write a massive like one day we got up in the morning and then we had this perfect idea and then we executed it and like here's the result. So that's what we write in a research article. And I always felt like that misses a lot of things, right? So
Correct.
we tried like so many different things before this and they all failed.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So research is very messy, so it's never like a clean cut line between like like a problem and an idea and a solution. It's usually very messy, and like you have to try many things before you get it. And so this was actually inspired by like a conversation I had on Twitter, where people were talking about different ideas and like how it's always a struggle. And like so Leslie Lamport, who is a Turing Award winner, and that's like the Nobel Prize of Computer Science. So in his blog or like in his website, he always used to provide like a short snippet about how they came up with an idea. So for example, there's this very famous algorithm called Paxos, and it's part of why Leslie Lamport won the Turing Award. And in his website, if you go look at it, he'll say that I was working at Microsoft, and some team asked me to build this thing, and I tried. I thought about it, and I thought it was impossible to build, and so I wanted to write a proof about it. And when I was writing the proof, I accidentally discovered that there is an algorithm to do what they wanted, and that is how Paxos was born. So I think all these like the history behind how different research ideas came about is like super interesting. And so I started a blog where basically I would invite people to talk about their research projects and how it got started and so on. And they would sort of like chat with me, like, similar to how we're doing. And I would write it up and then publish it as a blog post. We have had about like a dozen posts so far, and it's been popular. Like people have enjoyed reading these stories. And I think it's important to do this because apart from sort of the historical niceness, I think there's another myth, right, which is that research is sort of like a loner activity, that you do it
Yeah.
alone and you sit at a lab and like or a blackboard or whatever, you think really deeply, and then like you suddenly have this idea, right? This is not how research works at all, right? It's so research is a very social process, right? So you go to conferences, you talk to people, and you talk about what you're interested in, right? Hey, I've been working on consensus, or I've been working on storage systems, and this is what I've been working on. And sometimes somebody will ask you a question, right? Like, oh, like, have you tried doing this? Or like, I've read this other paper which does something similar in a different field. And that is really the spark. And that spark gives rise to an idea, and then like you still have to do a lot of work, but it sort of like shows how it's a social activity, right? You're not, there are different ways to look at research, right? And some people look at research as, I am pushing the boundary of knowledge and I'm really doing it for people 1,000 years down the line who's going to read my papers and all of this stuff. So I think that's one way to look at it, but I don't agree with it. I like to do research for the in the here and now fun of research. Like, yes, I do hope that people will use my results for like a long time, but that's not primarily why I'm doing it. Because like most of research is forgotten, right?
Yeah.
In Einstein's time, like there were lots of people doing great research, like, but like how many people do people know, right? Like, so you will be forgotten, like, and sometimes people are very, very lucky and they're like the 0.001% whose name becomes famous all over the world. But to me, that is not a realistic motivation to do research, right? If you get into research because like you want to win the Nobel Prize, I would say like like that's not a great thing to do. But if you do research because you like doing research, so every day is fun for you, I think that's a more uh, realistic way of looking at research. And so like the blog actually talks about all of these things, how we talk to people, how we get the ideas, and so people can see that like it is indeed a social process. And so it's more like you talk with friends, you get some ideas and you do it, and it removes some of the dryness and sort of like the, what do I say, like
Yeah.
the stigma of like being a loner or like like a genius from the field.
It makes more approachable also for me, because as an outsider I read that, and then I felt like how they think and how they conceive an idea, and it's not like they came up with the algorithm and just published it. There was a process, and that was more, like you mentioned, was messy, but people don't put that enough out, and it actually uh, intimidates the newbies who are coming into research.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that, and I wish it's there for every field. So I'm really hoping that people come out and do such things. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah.
Do you have any parting message?
Yeah. So I guess in the hope that, CG students hear this, right? So research is a really interesting field. And typically students in India, their thoughts after after graduating from a bachelor's degree is always either go do an MBA, or join a job immediately, or do a master's and then get a job. And this is very relatable, because this is what I knew when I was an undergrad also. But I feel like people should check out research. Like, there are lots of very interesting research opportunities, and for people who have a certain amount of curiosity, and want their work life to be very interesting, right? I think research is a good path. Now, for CG students in particular, I usually offer remote mentoring and sort of like an internship, where you get to work with me remotely on a research project. Typically, you do this before you apply for a master's degree, so that I can write you like a good letter if things go well, and it just worked out well in the past. So students I have recommended have gone to Purdue, University of Toronto, San Diego, and so on. So good universities in the US. It is a lot of work. I mean, you have to do your CG coursework and also do the research on the side. But I think students can do it. They can manage the load. And so if people are interested, I strongly encourage students to sort of drop me an email, and we can chat about potential research opportunities.
Thank you. Professor, before closing, I have one more question I missed.
Mm-hmm.
What are the alternate careers after PhD
Sure.
in industry, not necessarily in academia?
Yeah. So I mean, this is also another myth that um, if you do a PhD, you have to become a professor. And the vast majority of people who do PhDs do not become professors, simply because there are very few professor jobs. And I think in industry, a PhD is valued not so much for the specific thing that you worked on. So, for example, I did my PhD in storage systems, and the job offers I got did not concentrate on storage systems, right? They didn't. I mean, they were not like, we are hiring a storage system PhD. A PhD gives you a lot of other stuff. So if anybody uses Quora, I would recommend listeners go check out a Quora post that I had about this, I think back in the day, 2015 or something. But in short, a PhD allows you to navigate ambiguity. So in a PhD, what you're doing is that you are formulating a research problem, and then you're working to find the solution. Then you're actually presenting the results and convincing people that it is a good idea, right? Um, so this allows you to actually navigate ambiguity very well in industry life. So for example, I've talked to my friends where once a project is very well defined, right, they have decided this is the exact thing that we're going to do, then it's very easy to go ahead and do that. I mean, I wouldn't say trivial, it's still a lot of work, but the path is clear at least, right? And what a PhD allows you to do is you can drop into a situation where it's not clear what to do, or if you want to do anything at all, and it allows you to look at the situation, figure out this is the problem, these are the things that we can try, and allows you to formulate a clear path forward. So that's the main thing you get from a PhD, and that is of course valuable across different companies, right? It has nothing to do with the specific thing that you worked on, but you learn this process, going from the vague to the well-defined, and that actually holds you in good stead in a lot of different cases. So this is why in many tech companies, the senior people have a PhD, right? Because they know this, they know we have to meet some business goal. What do we do? And they translate that into very specific technical goals that the team can execute. And that is of course super valuable. So don't look at a PhD as I'm going to learn more about specific thing X, right? A PhD is about learning how to do research, learning how to navigate ambiguity. And so that is very useful everywhere.
Absolutely right. I really want to motivate students who are in undergrad level and they want to think deep into the career and I think research as a career is very prolific to me after talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today, and have a nice rest of the day.